4 minutes after 11 is the time. And obviously, we'd have to work out between us how we continue to converse about the single most important issue that our country has faced since the Second World War. But I am doubly conscious of both boring you to tears, although that's probably not quite the right turn of phrase, and avoiding the temptation to stop talking about it altogether. Obviously, if I'd encouraged you to vote for this, I probably would be talking about anything else at the moment. God knows what. The National Trust, Millwall Football Club. If I'd encouraged you to vote for this, I would be desperate to avoid talking about it. But thankfully, I didn't. I could have done. I certainly wasn't as clear about the benefits of membership, or more pertinently, the absurdity of leaving in the run-up to the referendum, in the years leading up to it, than I was in the immediate aftermath, or in the weeks, perhaps, the days leading up to it, when reality began to bite. But equally, I mean, I'm only half joking when I say that I will put £10 in a charity pot every time I say I told you so in the context of Brexit, because I could spend the rest of my working life saying I told you so, I told you so. And I don't think any of us would enjoy that. I will point out ad infinitum the contradiction between what people who persuaded you to vote for it told you then and what they say now, because that is the definition of hypocrisy and or dishonesty. And it seems to me to be very important to remind you that from Boris Johnson down, they swore blind that none of this was going to happen. You know, and trying to work out why without lazily portraying them all as liars, because if you're going to tell a lie, there has to be a reason why. There has to be an end that you think that is justified by the means. So I think it's lazy and probably wrong to do that. Conscious lying is not what Brexit was about. It was about epic ignorance, born of a sense of exceptionalism. This idea that, yeah, of course, rules. A bit like that woman in America many moons ago got sent to jail for not paying her taxes and was reported to have said that the taxes are for the little people. I think her name was Leonora Hemsley. And you can see that the Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings school of thought is that the laws are for the little people. You know, you're not allowed to drive to Barnard Castle on your wife's birthday and then lie through your teeth about testing your eyesight, but he is, because he's Dominic Cummings. And if you exercise that, or if you elevate that to a national level, two things happen. Brilliantly, of course, you get the people that you look down on, the people that you think are irrelevant plebs. You get them on your side, even while you continue to treat them with contempt. Because if you make it about nationality rather than wealth and status, you can bring with you the people that you spend the rest of your political life treating with complete contempt. And that's how they pulled the red wall off, you see, by bringing Brexit into the same sort of philosophical or psychological category as their innate sense of supremacy. So it's why white supremacism is, in other countries, such a powerful and intoxicating drug, because it lets very rich and powerful people con poor people of the same ethnicity or nationality into believing that they're somehow on the same team in life. They're not. Of course they're not. Taxes are for the little people. Laws are for the little people. Trips to Barnard Castle are for the rich people, the powerful people, the high-status people. Cheap shoes for peasants. It sort of resonates in my ear at this point. So that's the first thing that you pull off. You manage to persuade the people that you routinely, after 10 years of austerity, you manage to convince Labour voters, and I know Corbyn bears a lot of responsibility for this, but we can't keep banging that drum. After 10 years of austerity, you convince Labour constituencies in the north of England that you're on the same team as Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab. Absolute genius. How the hell do you do that? Not by consciously lying, but by fomenting and fostering these feelings of exceptionalism, these feelings of superiority, an ethnic or a national superiority. And it worked. Look where we are now. It's fallen apart incredibly quickly, quicker than even I thought it would, but that is how it works. And the second thing that you do when you sort of start floating this boat or flying this kite, you manage to keep observable evidence at bay. So you manage to keep this idea that we are different and therefore we don't have to follow the same paths, the same laws, the same rules as everybody else. Not in the context of human rights or whatever other red herring is being inflated today, but simply in the context of club membership. So of all the analogies and metaphors that we've shared together over the last 4 years, I still think the most powerful is probably the one about leaving a gym, not paying your membership fees, but still expecting to use the jacuzzi or the weights, or all of it, actually. Why do we? I shouldn't have to pay. And it is, when you think about it, that's the attitude that Dominic Cummings adopted to the lockdown rules. Well, everybody else has to observe them, but I think you'll find that I don't. It's the attitude that Boris Johnson has adopted to life, actually. As first spotted, I think, by his housemaster at Eton College, who pointed out, I think literally, almost word for word, he seems to think that the rules only apply to other people. And that's now become a national fetish. The problem with it is, the people who might benefit from that epic imbalance and inequality are not the people. Are not the people who've been persuaded to support it. And then we're back to Anaya and Bevin, aren't we? And the great triumph of 20th century conservatism is persuading Labour, with a small L, as in the workforce, to use their political power to keep wealth in power, voting against your own interests. And if you had to sum up Brexit in a sentence, persuading people to vote against their own interests, unless you still think your life's going to get better, in which case you know what to do. 0345, put down the little wax doll of me, put your pins back in the box and give me a call. How's your life going to get better? 0345 6060973. Or you tell me what you think has happened with these negotiations that doesn't fit into the three legs of a stool analysis. The four freedoms, the equality under the law or under the rules of every club member, and the Good Friday Agreement. Unscrew any one of those legs and the whole thing falls over. Peter's in Oxford. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello again, James. I'll be boring because I agree with everything you said earlier on. Your magic word you said was exceptionalism.
Yes,
Mine
I think
projection.
so. Projection?
Projection. So projection by the Brexit side onto the 17.4 million voters. They're projecting onto them the belief that they want to leave the single market and customs union. That wasn't on the ballot paper. What was on the ballot paper has been delivered in full now. Yes. And the government owes the 17.4 million people nothing. They've delivered on that. They've left the country has now left the EU. And for us, on the Remain side, that's slightly liberating because we can now think, actually, we don't need to talk about these 17.4 million anymore. We just talk about where we go in the future. And actually, the government's main obligation is to the 65 million who are likely to suffer from.
Well, yeah, but I don't. You're more glass half full than I am, because I think that the survival of this particular government hinges upon keeping these fires burning.
Well, I know, and it's of course a fantasy because that was never on the ballot paper. The other piece of projection is onto the EU, because this government is imputing to the EU the kind of motives that they themselves have.
Yes, that is true. Go on, carry on. Sorry.
I don't think anyone thinks they're most. At least I don't think anybody who's looked at it in detail and is honest with themselves about it believes that the motives are entirely honourable. And I think actually, I'm very much. I'm half Irish and half German. I live in Oxford, and I tend to see things through EU eyes for that very reason. But the EU has behaved honourably. This business of behaving in somehow an underhand way, this is complete fantasy. The EU has done exactly what it said it would do from the very start, and nothing more, nothing less. They will drive a hard bargain. That's what they always said they do. And your point about the four freedoms is well.
Do you know, even hard bargain is in danger of falling into the projection trap, because all they will do is defend their own interests. And up until 2016, they were our interests as well.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. The EU is doing exactly what the British government is doing, in the sense of defending its own nationals, and it has no obligations to the UK anymore. Now the UK has left. So of course the UK is on the outside looking, and they have this fantasy, I think, on the Brexit side, that the EU owes them something. That, for example, because the EU has made concessions to Canada, therefore it should make the same concessions to the UK. Well, no. This is a negotiation.
And we're not Canada.
What's going to put on the table. Yeah. They have sovereignty. this magic word sovereignty. The EU 27 can decide what they're going to negotiate with, and if they're going to make concessions over the four freedoms, for example, then they want something in return. Because and the UK has shown no willingness to do that, because as far as they're concerned, it is in their gift in some way to determine the outcome of the negotiations.
So yes, and if you adopted the curiosity of a 10-year-old child and just answered every point with why, but why? Why? Eventually,
why would they?
Eventually, all that's left is them shouting, because we're British. And that's not good. That's not going to work in a negotiation. It'll win you a referendum. It'll sell a bunch of newspapers. It'll put bums on seats on a tour of provincial theatres, but it will not butter any parsnips whatsoever in negotiations because we're British.
Can I mention Theresa Villiers?
Please. Well, yeah, all right.
If I must.
Please is a bit strong.
Morning,
yes.
She talked about essentially if the UK concedes, then it's not a Brexit deal worth having. Well, I agree entirely with her about that. You know, I mean, Tony Blair said Brexit was always only ever going to be pointless or painful. I think I'd go further. I think it's both pointless and painful. And so Theresa Villiers is saying that there's no, it's not a Brexit worth having. No Brexit is worth having.
No. That's the elephant in the room for people like that. Although I don't think she realises that yet. Do you?
No, but I mean, so many Tories have said this, that, unless it's the kind of Brexit that they fantasised about, then it hasn't been delivered properly. Well, as I said at the beginning, that's not really what was on the ballot paper.
No, and the Brexit they fantasised about is a Brexit built on the exceptionalism. So exceptionalism plus projection equals chaos.
On exceptionalism, and the Daily Mail in their campaign for British expats, I mean, as I think you pointed out yourself, the only country in the world whose citizens are called expats is the UK. Everybody else's citizens are called immigrants, including me, I hasten to say. They've been campaigning on the basis that...
Well, that is it. Actually, I hadn't thought of it like that. It's a distillation of exceptionalism, isn't it? To think that when we go and live in other countries, we're doing them a favour. And when people come and live here, we're doing them a favour as well. Good grief. Even after all these years, Peter, with somebody like you holding my hand, I can make new breakthroughs of understanding about our curious national malaise. Many thanks indeed. It's 11:15. Couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060973. If you did vote for it, what did you think was going to happen? Because there are plenty of perfectly nice and good and plausible reasons for why you thought things would happen that have now we know they're not going to happen. So do take a moment if you can. What did you think was going to happen? And why do you think it hasn't? 0345 6060973. 19 after 11. A quick diversion. What a remarkable statement this is from the chairman of Colchester United Football Club. Chairman and owner, indeed. Robbie Cowling is his name. And I'll retweet it. I urge you to read this. I kind of missed the brouhaha about racists booing footballers at the weekend who took the knee. But if you'd told me about it, I'm involved in some end-of-life care at the moment, which really does help with your priorities, I can tell you that for nothing. But if you'd said to me last night, some Millwall fans booed people taking the knee, I'd have gone, oh, Lord above. Here we go again. It's going to be, national trust-type arguments and absolute nonsense. What's wrong with a little bit of light racism? Give me a call now and defend it. That's a joke, by the way. Please don't give me a call now and defend light racism. Or even heavy racism. But this chairman of Colchester United is absolutely incredible, because not only does he reach a blistering conclusion, he explains how he got there. And like a lot of... I don't actually know Robbie Cowling's ethnicity, but judging by his explanation of his own journey of understanding, I presume, like me, he's white, and therefore sometimes you need a little bit of help imagining what life would be like in somebody else's skin or in somebody else's shoes. And he explains that, I presume Callum Harriott plays for Colchester. You're going to have to forgive me for not being fully across all of the personnel in this story. And there's no snobbery involved there. I support Kidderminster Harriers. We're way further down the footballing ladder. But Callum Harriott described the purpose of the gesture perfectly to me. So if you're interested in what the gesture means, just ask someone who knows. If you're not interested and you're looking for an opportunity to excuse racism, then pretend that it's a Marxist movement, or that somehow there's a desire to defund the police being expressed when Colchester United players go down on one knee in the centre circle. It's so bovine that it would almost beg a belief, but then you remember that the same people are now running a million miles away from the responsibility they bear for inflicting Brexit on this country. So Callum Harriott described the purpose of the gesture perfectly to me, explaining that taking the knee dates back to early civil rights movements as a way of silently showing solidarity in support of political inequalities suffered by oppressed communities. And what's clear from Cowling's statement is that he needed help in understanding, just as I did. I explain my own journey in some of these fields in my new book, but it's this conclusion here. Maybe those that booed on Saturday might now understand what this gesture means to our club and will at the very least remain silent during future games whilst the players continue to take the knee before each kickoff. Alternatively, they should stay away from our club because anyone that still wants to boo, now that I have explained the purpose and importance of the taking of the knee, is not welcome at our club. And what I love about that is it avoids all dangers of knee-jerk reactions. So you may well have thought that what you were doing when you booed football players at the weekend was somehow expressing disapproval of Karl Marx or support for not defunding the police, despite the fact that the people who talk about defunding the police spent the last 10 years cheerleading austerity, which literally defunded the police. But hey, what he's saying is it's excusable to be ignorant. But now you've had it explained, it's inexcusable. Concluding that I will be happy to refund anyone for the remaining value of their season ticket if that is the reason they feel they can no longer attend our games. Oh boy. If I wasn't such a dyed-in-the-wool Kidderminster Harriers fan, I would transfer my allegiances to Colchester United immediately, not least because it'd be a hell of a lot easier to get to home games. But there we are, over to you, Millwall, and hopefully you understand, if you are susceptible to this kind of racist rhetoric, that taking the knee is anything other than an age-old expression of support for the rejection of oppression of minorities, then now you know better. So now it's on you see. That's why I love that statement from Robbie Cowling of Colchester United so much. And similarly with Brexit. So absolutely, there's a few people are saying, in fact, I'll read you one. James, I relate entirely to what you said. I voted for Brexit, but I now regret it. And I remember thinking that we would be able to do things that other EU countries couldn't do simply because of our passport, because of the passport we held. I don't get how you're refraining from Schadenfreude. I'll foot half the bill if you want to get those 4 words off your chest. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that. But the reason there's no pleasure in being proved right about this is twofold. Number one, I get hit as well, although not as hard as less comfortably off people. And number two, I genuinely believe that people shouldn't be hauled over the coals for being misled. I know not everyone agrees with me on this, that the old contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned line. But that's what Robbie Cowling has done there. He said, look, if you weren't aware of X, Y, and Z, then what you did on Saturday was understandable, even perhaps excusable. So I will now make you aware of the facts. And if you still cling to the hate-filled response, now that you know it is hate-filled, then I've got a problem with you and you're not welcome at my football club anymore. And that's why, to answer your question, there's no Schadenfreude, there's no pleasure in misfortune on my part, because most people that voted for it believed things that weren't true or were not aware of things that are true. Which makes today's question so urgent. Why do you think the negotiations have reached a point where it's a choice between a rubbish deal or, even worse, no deal, when we were supposed to now be inhabiting sunlit uplands, taking back control of everything, and not only having our cake, but also eating it? So why do you think things have fallen apart so completely and so comprehensively? Adam's in Bletchley. Adam, if you can remember why you rang in, I'd love you to tell me.
Yeah, that's a good one. Hello, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
Long-time listener. James, the things look the way they are, they do, because they couldn't look any other way. It's simple as that. It's the whole logic of Brexit, And you enjoy a good, comparison or analogy.
I do.
And here's one for you. It's a national hangover. I don't think that Great Britain has ever overcome the fact that you've lost an empire. And you can compare it to the same sort of situation, mental situation in Germany, whereas over there, they never get over the fact that they caused the Second World War and caused all these atrocities.
Therefore, they try super hard to do the right thing as a result of that guilt.
It's the same thing in Russia. They never get over the fact that the Soviet Union has collapsed. They lost Belarus, Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Poland as a satellite country as well. That's why they're still pushing westwards, because, they want to regain that influence and so on and so forth. And another thing,
and that's why, just to expand upon your point, because I hadn't thought of this before, I'm often confused by why people get so furious about history. And you have Conservative MPs writing to the Daily Telegraph insisting that the National Trust doesn't do history and instead sort of continues punting post-Imperial lines that absolve us of all responsibility for anything bad that happened. And how dare you tell me where the money came from to build this house? Because that would create an environment in which we felt we probably had to atone in some way for what happened in the 19th century in the way that Germans feel they should atone for what happened in the 20th century.
Absolutely, and I've been watching some documentaries with regards to how the British Empire has collapsed and fall apart decade by decade. Rhodesia, Rwanda, Singapore, and so on and so forth. How this domino has fallen, one by one. Maybe people they're just not into being ruled by a foreign power, much, and that's why they wanted their independence. But what I said when I first called in is that when Poland was running up to a membership in 2003 or 2004, I think we've joined. I was studying law at the University of Gdańsk at that time, and I remember an interview with a member of Polish Parliament. Because we had to pass so much legislation on the run up to membership, and he said, that was a pretty easy day today. We only passed like 30 different acts of parliament today, but we did this massive titanic sort of work in a run up because we knew we are joining a better legal system,
as we did in the 70s. Not a legal system, but certainly economically.
Yes, we realised, Brexiteers, the Leavers, they are throwing, things like independence, obviously the sovereignty and whatnot.
Control.
Yeah, and things like that. We knew that we're going to have to give up a certain, amount of control, but we knew exactly what we've been joining. Better technologies, access to foreign markets, everything which, Britain is leaving right now. We've been joining that. So, the possibilities were endless. The sky was the limit. We knew we have to better our production, better our standards. We're going to have to, get rid of some of the industries, for example, coal, which still exists in Poland anyway. We still use it. However, we knew we are joining a better system overall.
And that's the trade. I mean, that's what dilution of sovereignty means. It means we can't do whatever the hell we want because.
But what does it mean, sovereignty?
Well, nothing.
Because we're British.
No.
And when I talk to my mates at work, and they're predominantly English.
Yes.
And I honestly try to understand their reasons for voting to leave.
Yes.
And the conclusion is that we are better. They will give us a deal because we are English or British.
Yes.
If Gibraltar is gone, well, to hell with them. If Scotland is going to be independent or whatever, we've never been so much aligned anyway. Northern Ireland, well, that's a small price to pay.
Yes. For what? A small price to pay for what?
Well, for the sovereignty, obviously.
And that's when sovereignty appeared in the conversation, when everything that you could actually measure, count or see had disappeared over the horizon. They started talking about sovereignty. Nobody mentioned sovereignty in the run-up to the referendum. Talked about control, which is equally nebulous, arguably. But, of course, we discovered fairly quickly that we had loads more control over loads more things than anybody realised in the run-up to the referendum. 11:30. Thank you, Adam. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:35 is the time. I love that. Even after all this time together, we still have little moments of clarity that I'd never seen before, trying to work out the best ways to explain exceptionalism. But it is true, isn't it, that there is a world view or a view of the UK, in the UK. It's why we use the words expats, perhaps, although there are more technical explanations of that. When we emigrate to other countries, we're doing those other countries a favour. And when people from those other countries emigrate to the UK, we're doing those people from other countries a favour. And there'll be people listening now who go, yeah, damn right, exactly. And that's English exceptionalism, right there. And it is bizarre. And it is Brexit. And it is exactly where we are. And indeed, why. I know this is a little bit... Well, it isn't actually. This one's particularly funny. It would have worked better on Twitter, but Guy's been in touch to call me a nasty, decisive little man. And then he's had to text me again to correct decisive to divisive, but he's managed to spell divisive wrong. So he spelled it D-E-V. I know it's a little bit petty, but goodness me, I do enough of the grown-up stuff to be allowed a little bit of schoolboy humour. So a guy tweets a radio presenter, say, "You nasty, decisive little man," realises his mistake, corrects decisive to divisive, and manages to spell that wrong as well. And Guy, forgive me, mate, no one even needs to wonder how you voted in the referendum. You've just shown us. Martin's in Romford. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello there. Nice to speak to you.
Oh.
Nice to speak to you. All I'd like to say is that this agreement's never going to happen. It's all going to be rushed through. It's going to be a duff deal. But
hang on, you can't not happen and get rushed through.
What's going to happen is they're never going to make a decision. The Europeans.
Well, then it's not going to get rushed through, is it?
Don't want us to leave. That's why it's.
We've already left.
When we voted to get out.
We've already left.
Yeah, when we voted to get out on that Friday, we should have left on the Monday. Took 4 years of quibbling.
Right.
At the end of the day, this country is going to make mistakes, but at least our own elected idiots are going to do it.
Right.
When they make mistakes, we can boot them out. But all these rules they've done over all the years.
So we haven't had a general election since 1973.
It's all been.
Martin, you have to listen at some point. Martin, we have had general elections since 1973. You know?
I know we have.
Yeah, well, you can boot out politicians in exactly the same way after Brexit as you can before. I know what you're saying, and you have to listen a bit. So, is the deal not going to happen, or is it going to be rushed through?
It's basically the deal's not going to happen.
Right. So nothing's going to get rushed through then.
Or if there is a decision, it's just going to be a duff deal on both.
So it isn't going to happen, or it is.
I don't think it will happen. No,
but it might.
It's not going to happen.
So then it can't be rushed through.
Well, what I'm saying to you is that it's all left. It's all left to the last minute because the Europeans, they are desperate. They're desperate to trade with us.
Right.
They're desperate because they make more money out of us than we do them.
Where are you getting? Yes, but you're speaking about 27 countries as opposed to one. Do you see?
Yeah.
So the only reason you can point to a deficit, if you like, with the EU is because there's 27 countries. So you add up 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 27.
Right. But I feel the end of the day.
Yeah.
The end of the day.
Go on.
We should have left on the Monday when we voted out on the Friday.
You keep saying that. You keep saying that, Martin. But what about customs? If we'd left on the Monday, what do you think would have happened at our ports?
There is going to be problems to start with, but in the long run, this country will be so much better.
Yeah.
We make all our own decisions.
What are you most looking forward to? What are you most looking forward to?
To all make our own decisions, whether they're right or wrong, rather some little tiny principality of Luxembourg telling us what to do.
When did they do that? When did they do that? I missed that.
Many years.
Yeah, go on. When did they do that? What did they tell us to do?
What to do.
What did they tell us to do that we didn't want to do?
We can make our own mistakes.
I can't wait, mate.
And we can make our own good decisions.
Before you go, what was the worst thing Luxembourg made us do?
I'm just saying.
I know. You're telling me how awful it is, but what was the worst rule they made?
Why has it took him 4 years to get out of it?
I don't know, mate. I just want to know. It's not a trick question. What was the very worst thing that those pesky principalities...
They shouldn't have been telling us to do anything.
You're damn right they shouldn't. So what did they tell us to do? What did they tell us to do, Martin? What rules did they make?
Country, how we run our lives.
What did they tell us to do?
It should have been trade only. Now,
I know.
They're still discussing about whether they can fish in our waters.
Oh, it's nuts, isn't it?
Never happened.
Before you go, what was the worst thing that Luxembourg made us do?
I don't care. In the end of the day, I don't care what decisions they made. They shouldn't be making any decisions.
So what decisions did they make for us?
At the end of the day, we voted to get out.
We did.
All this nonsense in the media about we was lied to. A lot of people just wanted to take back control.
Of what?
That's all. Our own decisions.
What decisions?
Our own decisions.
What decisions?
Trade, where we,
What?
Everything. We
yeah, but for example,
decisions, a local government and the government, not some unelected nobody in Luxembourg.
No, I know.
It's one of the best things this country's ever done.
I couldn't agree more. Down with Luxembourg. Before you go, the worst thing that the pesky Principality of Luxembourg made us do?
Principality of Luxembourg.
Down with them and all who sail in them. But what's the worst thing?
They're still arguing now. We want to fish in your waters.
I know.
We want to do this. We want to do
unbelievable.
that. We should just trade only. That's it.
Yeah.
WTO. We'll just trade with them.
Yeah.
At least we ain't got to abide by all the rules. All these unelected
do you know the WTO?
Tell us what to do.
The WTO has really strict rules.
It's the best thing that's happened.
I know. It's great. I can't wait. But I just need to tell you one thing before you go. Before you go.
The EU will crumble.
Before you go. Oh, the EU's going to crumble.
It's going to crumble.
It's going to crumble. Before you go, are you familiar with the WTO rules?
I don't. It probably will cost us more money. It will cost us more money.
I'll take that as a no. Sarah's in Tunbridge. Sarah, what would you like? I nearly said question or answer there because it all felt a bit like mystery hour back then. But Sarah, what would you like to say?
Well, I hadn't realised we'd been run by Luxembourg for all these years. I thought we were an extremely powerful country who could do it alone. We won the last war, apparently, all on our own.
1966.
We took over half the world, apparently all on our own, as opposed to raping the rest of the countries and stealing all their goods with Luxembourg.
Why, love and respect to Martin, why do you think the negotiations have ended up with essentially a choice between a really flimsy deal or no deal at all?
Well, because it was a crummy idea in the beginning. But can I get back? I'll get back to exceptionalism.
Yes, please.
You see, this is the great problem. You see, if you teach children, I'm 75, and all my life I was taught that, we were propagandized, that, the empire we had, really, because we're altruistic, we
did the world a favour.
Yes,
we did the world a favour. I think my generation, because I'm 48, and that's an interesting 25 years between you and me, because I don't have that. And most of the people of my generation that do have it, in the context of Brexit, the prominent politicians, they grew up overseas. They grew up in places like what is now Zimbabwe or South Africa or I think in Daniel Hannan's case, Peru. So you could only really sustain that notion of English exceptionalism after we stopped teaching it if you lived somewhere else and it was still...
Yeah, but for instance, I just finished reading a Carla's fantastic, and I know you've interviewed him,
yes.
Natives, which I think should be mandatory in every 5th and 6th form, because that really is teaching a lot. Because, I mean, you just pointed out all this appalling right-wing stuff. The National Trust must not tell us about how we got... it's wicked if they start telling us how...
Historic houses should not do history. I think we can all agree on that, Sarah.
I know. It's absolutely true. And Millwall, you mustn't bend the knee. I mean, whether these people would actually ever get around to reading
Excuse
the book...
me, I think... it's all very well picking on those two examples. I think you're underestimating the importance of cycle lanes to the national pageant at the moment, Sarah.
Yes, you see, because... this is how power works. If you're a cyclist and do something wrong, every motorist can get on the radio and say how appalling cyclists are. Because they're, in reality, they have to go on our terrifying roads. And the big boys, the ones like me in a car...
Yes, you have all the power. You have all the power, and it's not enough. You also want to be able to wipe out the people with less power. Sarah, you've taken me all the way up to the news, or at least to the break. Simon Calder's been in touch, the doyen of travel correspondence. I mentioned that because his qualifications for the contribution he makes to the programme are impeccable. He tells us Luxembourg is not a pesky principality. It is, in fact, a grand duchy. It was also the first country in the world with completely free public transport. The crafty villains. 11:49 is the time. What did you think was going to happen by now if you voted for Brexit? Because I suppose you could call me and claim that you knew that this was going to happen, but then oddly you'd be in complete agreement with me, because I started explaining about 3 years ago why eventually all you'd have left to shout about would be fish. But that might be fun. Give me a buzz. Or if you're, dare I say, a little bit more honest or a little bit more open-eyed, clear-eyed, you could give me a ring and tell me where you actually thought we'd be, what you actually thought would happen. Because the choice between a pretty rubbish deal or, even worse, no deal at all certainly wasn't, to my mind, what anybody voted for. And the idea that Boris Johnson is now essentially in charge of making that decision, chilling, isn't it? Or not. I mean, give me a ring and tell me why it's actually brilliant. And this is exactly what you were looking forward to most. And you are already halfway up the sunlit uplands while simultaneously having your cake and eating it. I feel bad for keeping Kevin on hold because he's been there for ages. So I might take Kevin's call briefly, or seeing as he's in France, vite, and then we'll turn to our political editor, Theo Usherwood, for an update on, presumably, Theo, in a word?
Lots happening.
Nothing's happened. Nothing at all. Nothing's happened. Theo will be here with an urgent update shortly to tell us nothing. And that's Brexit in yet another nutshell. Kevin is in the Three Valleys in France, in the Alps indeed. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
Just really ring up to agree with you.
Oh.
Regarding...
Even I'm getting bored with people agreeing with me, Kevin. Not with you personally, but I would quite like to have a bit of a chat. I mean, someone to say it's all going brilliantly, and I knew it would, and this is exactly what I voted for.
Well, maybe you should give Martin a call back. He'll tell you how well it's doing.
Bless him. How's things in France, anyway? How are you getting on?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Obviously, a different perspective over here of Brexit. I don't think anyone over here really wants it. I don't hear anyone talking about fishing, but I'm not completely fluent, so maybe they are, and I'm just not getting it.
And you're not by the coast either. I mean, the French fishing, it's politically toxic for Macron to tell French fishing folk that they will have less fish to catch in the future. But the exceptionalism thing intrigues me the most. Although
a lot of people still believe in it, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's something that's pushed about by the right-wing media.
But it works. Do you not feel it at all? Because I'll tell you what happened the other day. When the vaccine was announced, and after 2020, I'm dancing around the studio. This is just such fantastic news. Finally, we can go on the radio with good news. There's a slight concern in the back of my mind. Why have we gone quicker than everybody else on the planet? But I have faith in the public health professionals who explained why, rather than subscribing to the notion that they'd been pushed into it by politicians.
Yeah.
And then Anthony Fauci, for whom up until that point I had nothing but the most enormous admiration, because to do the job that he's done while ostensibly working for Donald Trump it takes epic integrity and courage, I think, and clarity. And then a European Union diplomat who I don't think was named, both expressed misgivings about the speed with which we'd passed the vaccine. And I felt my heckles rising. I felt, hang on a minute, I'm allowed to worry about this, but you're not allowed to tell me, you foreign person, whether you're American or Polish or... And that, I think, is a little seed that if you watered it and nurtured it and subscribed to the right newspapers, that seed could actually grow into quite a big tree where you would think, hang on a minute, how dare you? You're foreign, you can't... Do you see? Or am I being daft?
Yeah, it doesn't take much.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Does it really? And obviously where we are now, the press have already laid the blame at the EU. So really, the Brexiteers can't actually lose anymore because... it's win-win. You know, it's not their fault they voted for it because they thought it was going to be fantastic, and now it's not going to be fantastic. It's the fault of the EU. So, in a way,
that will float because the alternative is to admit an error.
Yeah,
quite a few people. There's a text here asking if you've got a spare room, Kevin.
Well, funny enough, yes.
We'll find out more about that at a later date. Kevin, take care. Theo Usherwood is here with an urgent update.
No, not quite, James. Sorry. No, there's no update. Well, what we do know so far, James, is that Michel Barnier has updated the ambassadors to the European Union that the 27 other countries send to the European Union, and he has given a downbeat and gloomy assessment of where the talks are at the moment. The two outstanding issues, as you mentioned, fish and then the level playing field. Fish, there'd been some talk that there was some sort of compromise between 5 and 7 years for the rights of EU fishermen to fish in UK territorial waters. The French wanted 10 years. Britain was hoping for a 2 or 3 year time limit. Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, has actually come out this morning and said that's still an outstanding issue. It hasn't been sorted out. And that backs up Downing Street's assessment. Last night there'd been noises off from the European Union that actually fish had been sorted. But the more fundamental problem, of course, is the level playing field. And that's something that the European Union feels that it can't necessarily sign up to wholesale from the UK's point of view, because of course what that would do would give the UK the ability to diverge completely from EU rules and regulations and become potentially a threat to the European Union market, the single market, by attracting businesses from places like America or China or Brazil into the UK, and that would harm EU interests. So that's where the divergence is, because of course the EU want the UK to sign up to those same rules and regulations, so that there's an even a chance of attracting those types of businesses into either the EU or the UK.
What do you think is going to happen? Or are you not comfortable answering that question? Because you know this programme is an antidote to footballification. So for me right now, I'd say 52-48 if I was feeling facetious. I think the likelihood of no deal is slightly higher than the likelihood of a flimsy deal, but only because I'm looking at it through the lens of Boris Johnson's past performance.
Can I not give you a binary answer?
No, of course. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to. What goes against a deal is that if Boris Johnson is seen to cave to EU demands, that becomes quite easy for Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, because he can say to his MPs, we need to support this. And because otherwise the alternative would be a no-deal scenario on January the 1st. Labour MPs get behind it. Huge revolt on the Conservative benches, as it would go through potentially on Labour votes. If backbenchers, Tory backbenchers, say, "Well, you've just caved in, and we haven't got what everybody voted for in 2016." I'm not criticising you, but it's not caving in. It's accepting.
No. So I'm saying it from their point of view. Sorry,
I know, quite right too.
So if Conservative Brexiters see it as the Prime Minister caving into the demands, and Boris Johnson is in a weaker position now politically than he was 2 or 3 months ago prior to the restrictions on COVID. I'm thinking about the rule of 6, I'm thinking about the 10 p.m. curfew, I'm thinking about the second lockdown, politically amongst his own backbenchers, then that becomes problematic for the Prime Minister, because if he gets it through on Labour votes, with a huge revolt of Conservative MPs going beyond the usual hardcore of ERG, European Research Group types, then that's going to be a huge problem, because you could see Boris Johnson going into 2021, okay, with a trade deal in place, but with the potential for a leadership challenge later on in the year if it doesn't go too well, and if something else crosses, if there's another misstep in terms of the parliamentary party as well.
So if Boris Johnson does what I think it's fair to say he has done at every single stage of his life, both personal and professional and political, and prioritises Boris Johnson over absolutely everything else, then probably no deal.
Yes, the other thing, of course, to consider is that there is a chunk of Conservative support which is linked entirely to Brexit, and that politically it is good news for Boris Johnson to keep talking about Brexit, to keep Brexit on the agenda, that when you take away Brexit,
there's nothing left.
He has a problem in terms of galvanising around 10% of his vote. And if he keeps Brexit on the agenda, the best way to do that is not to sort out Brexit with a trade deal and to end up in this clash which could run into next year. We could have queues along the motorways with lawyers trying to cross into the European Union, lengthy checks. You could have all sorts of problems, potentially with the vaccine being flown into this country. And of course,
that was a story yesterday. In normal circumstances, that we'd be screaming from the rooftops that we're worried about our ports.
We've spent £700 million, James Cleverly, the Foreign Office Minister, said this morning, ensuring that the vaccine can come into the UK from Belgium, where it's being manufactured and stored, into the UK without any hold-ups at the border, in the event of a no deal.
So it's cost us £700 million already. Or yes. We will spend it in the event of a no deal. Because even if there's a deal, there's going to be massive hold-ups at the port. So our friend John Shirley was on Newsnight on Friday. Better late than never, lads.
But what I'm saying is that in terms of the advantage of a no, not the advantage, in terms of why there might be a no deal, I'd state those two reasons. firstly, is domestic politics in Westminster, but also out in the country. But then on the other hand, we understand, of course, from the forecast from the OBR during the spending review, the recovery from the pandemic would be much slower in the event of a no-deal, or as the Prime Minister refers to, an Australia-style arrangement, and the implications of the border with queues.
Except I know this isn't you, you're reduced, because what Theo said there, he said as the Prime Minister describes it, an Australia-style arrangement. So it's not Theo's fault that that's not true. Australia has a whole heap of trade deals that we will not have in the event of us adopting what the Prime Minister likes to call an Australia-style arrangement. They're also desperately pursuing a free trade agreement with the European Union, as indeed, arguably, is every sensible market on the planet, which leaves you wondering how you describe a market on the planet that was walking away from a trade agreement with the European Union. In fact, Theo, I think technically it's fair to say that Brexit will make the free trade area in which England operates and Scotland and Wales smaller than the United Kingdom.
Yes.
It's 12 noon.